I was traveling alone to London, England for the first time. I was excited but also nervous, as it was my first time traveling internationally, and I had no idea what to expect. I arrived at the airport early, as I always do, to avoid any last-minute mishaps. After going through security and customs, I settled down at a cafe near my gate, waiting for my flight. It was early in the morning, and the airport was still quiet. A few people were milling around, but most were still asleep, their heads on their luggage or on the table in front of them. I ordered a cup of coffee and opened my laptop, trying to distract myself from my anxiety. As I was typing away, a man walked up to me and asked if he could sit at the table with me. I nodded, and he sat down. He was a middle-aged man, wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. He seemed polite and well-spoken. We struck up a conversation, and he told me he was also traveling to London for business. He was a salesman, he said, and he had to attend a conference there. He was friendly enough, but something about him gave me the creeps. Maybe it was the way he kept staring at me, or the way his smile seemed forced. We chatted for a while, and I tried to make polite conversation, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. After a few minutes, he stood up and excused himself, saying he had to make a phone call. I watched him as he walked away, and I saw him pull out his phone and make a call, talking in a low voice. I felt even more uneasy now, and I started to regret my decision to let him sit at my table. I decided to move to another table, but as I stood up, he returned and sat down again, his briefcase still in hand. "Sorry about that," he said. "My boss called, and I had to take the call." "So, what brings you to London?" I told him I was visiting a friend and tried to steer the conversation away from myself, but he kept asking questions, probing into my personal life. I felt like I was being interrogated, and I started to feel very uncomfortable. Just then, the boarding announcement came on, and I quickly gathered my things and made my way to the gate. The man followed me, and I could feel him staring at me the whole time. As we boarded the plane, I hoped I would be seated far away from him, but my luck wasn't that great. He was seated in the row behind me, and I could feel him staring at the back of my head the whole time. I tried to ignore him, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. As the plane took off, I closed my eyes and tried to relax, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. After a few minutes, I felt something brush against my hair, and I jumped in my seat, turning around to see what it was. It was the man, his hand still raised as if he was trying to touch my hair. "Sorry," he said, "I thought you had something on your hair." I was livid now, and I told him to keep his hands to himself. He apologized again and turned away, but I could still feel his gaze on the back of my head. The rest of the flight was uneventful, but I couldn't wait to get off the plane and away from that man. As we landed, I quickly gathered my things and made my way to the exit. As I walked through the airport, I saw the man again, standing near the baggage claim. He was staring at me again, his briefcase still in hand. I tried to avoid him and made my way to the baggage claim, hoping to grab my bags quickly and get out of there. But as I waited for my luggage to arrive, I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. It was the man, and he was standing too close to me for comfort. "Excuse me," he said, but I couldn't help but notice that we're staying at the same hotel. "Maybe we could share a taxi." I told him no, that I had already arranged for a ride, but he insisted, saying it would be more cost-effective if we split the fare. I felt trapped, and I didn't know what to do. Just then, my bags arrived, and I quickly grabbed them and made my way to the exit, hoping he wouldn't follow me. But as I stepped outside, I saw him standing near a taxi, waiting for me. I tried to walk away, but he followed me, insisting that we share the ride. I didn't know what to do, and I was too scared to say no. As we got into the taxi, I could feel him staring at me the whole time. I was shaking now, and I could feel the tension in the air. I tried to make small talk, but he didn't seem interested in talking anymore. As we arrived at the hotel, I quickly got out of the taxi and paid my share of the fare. But as I turned to leave, the man grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Wait," he said, "I just wanted to apologize for earlier. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." I tried to pull away, but he held onto my arm tightly. I could see the anger in his eyes now, and I knew I had to get away from him. Suddenly, a hotel staff member appeared, and the man quickly let go of my arm, stepping back as if nothing had happened. "Is there a problem here?" the staff member asked. The man shook his head, and I quickly made my way into the hotel, relieved to be away from him. But as I walked up to my room, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was still not right. I felt like I was being watched, and I couldn't relax. As I settled down in my room, I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that it was just my imagination. But as I looked out the window, I saw the man again, standing outside the hotel, staring up at my room. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I quickly closed the curtains, hoping he wouldn't try to come up to my room. For the rest of my trip, I was constantly on edge, avoiding the man whenever I saw him and trying to stay safe. I didn't know what his intentions were, but I knew I didn't want to find out. In the end, I made it back home safely, but I never forgot that creepy encounter. To this day, I still wonder what could have happened if I hadn't been careful, and I always make sure to stay aware of my surroundings when I'm traveling alone. I was on a solo trip to Europe, excited to explore new cities and experience different cultures. I had planned to stay in hostels to save money, but on my first night in Paris, I decided to treat myself to a nice hotel room. As I was checking in, I caught the eye of a handsome stranger in the lobby. He smiled at me, and I felt a flutter in my stomach. I didn't think much of it, though, and I quickly made my way to my room. But later that night, as I was enjoying a glass of wine in a hotel bar, the stranger appeared again, taking a seat next to me. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, flashing a charming smile. I hesitated for a moment, but then I shrugged and nodded, figuring it wouldn't hurt to have some company. We chatted for a while, and I found myself drawn to him. He was witty, intelligent, and had a magnetic personality. Before I knew it, we were walking back to my room together. The night was incredible. We talked, laughed, and made love like we had known each other for years. But when I woke up the next morning, things felt different. The stranger was still there, watching me as I got dressed. I could feel his eyes on me, and it made me uncomfortable. "Can I see you again tonight?" he asked, as I headed for the door. I hesitated, not sure if I was ready to see him again so soon. But he was insistent, saying that he had to see me again, that he couldn't get me out of his head. I finally agreed, and we made plans to meet later that night. But as the day went on, I started to feel uneasy. The way he had looked at me that morning had sent shivers down my spine, and I didn't know if I wanted to see him again. But when I arrived at the designated meeting spot, he was already there, waiting for me with a bouquet of flowers. I tried to keep things casual, but he was intense, telling me that he had never felt this way before, that he needed me in his life. I tried to be gentle, telling him that I wasn't looking for anything serious, but he didn't seem to hear me. He kept talking about our future together, how we could travel the world, see everything together. As the night wore on, I started to feel trapped. He wouldn't let me leave, and I didn't know how to get away from him. He was charming and sweet, but I could sense a darkness lurking beneath the surface. Finally, I told him I had to go, and I left, feeling relieved to be away from him. But as I walked back to my hotel, I could feel him following me. I turned around, and he was there, watching me. I picked up the pace, hoping to lose him, but he kept following me, his footsteps echoing in the quiet street. When I reached my hotel, I quickly went inside and locked the door, hoping he wouldn't try to follow me in. But as I sat in my room, I could feel his presence outside, like he was watching me through the walls. I couldn't sleep that night, and the next day, I left Paris early, too scared to stay any longer. I never heard from the stranger again, but the memory of him stayed with me, a reminder that sometimes, even the most charming people can have a dark side. Despite my fear and discomfort from the encounter with the stranger in Paris, I continued my trip through Europe. I visited new cities, tried new foods, and met new people, hoping to forget about the incident. But as I arrived in Barcelona, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was the stranger, and he had somehow managed to track down my phone number. "Hey, it's me," the text read. "I've missed you. Can we meet up again?" My heart raced as I read the message. How had he found me? And why was he still trying to contact me after what had happened in Paris? I tried to ignore the message, but the stranger was persistent. He kept texting me, calling me, and sending me messages on social media, telling me that he couldn't live without me. At first, I tried to be polite, telling him that I wasn't interested in seeing him again. But he wouldn't listen. He kept sending me messages, telling me that he knew we were meant to be together. I started to feel like I was being stalked. Everywhere I went, I felt like he was watching me, following me. I couldn't relax, couldn't enjoy my trip, knowing that he was out there somewhere. One night, I went out to a bar with some new friends I had met. We were laughing and having a good time when I looked across the room and saw the stranger, watching me. I froze, not knowing what to do. But my friends noticed that something was wrong and asked me what was going on. "That guy over there," I whispered, pointing to the stranger. "He's been following me." My friends immediately sprang into action, confronting the stranger and telling him to leave me alone. He protested, saying that he just wanted to talk to me, but my friends wouldn't listen. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as the stranger was escorted out of the bar. But as we left, I could feel his eyes on me, like he was still watching me from a distance. The next day, I received another message from the stranger. This time, he had sent me a photo of us from that night in Paris. "I know you still think about me," the message read. "I can't wait to see you again." I felt sick to my stomach as I looked at the photo. How had he gotten it? And how was he still able to find me, even when I was in a different country? I knew I had to do something, so I went to the police. They listened to my story, but there wasn't much they could do. The stranger hadn't technically done anything wrong, and they didn't have any evidence of him stalking me. Feeling helpless, I decided to cut my trip short and head back home. But even as I boarded the plane, I could feel the stranger's presence, like he was still watching me, still obsessed with me. When I finally arrived home, I tried to put the whole experience behind me. But the memory of the stranger lingered, a constant reminder that there are some people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. I never heard from the stranger again, but I still wonder about him sometimes. Was he just a lonely guy looking for love, or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? I may never know, but one thing's for sure, I'll never forget that trip, and the stranger who followed me across Europe. I settled into my seat on the plane, looking forward to a peaceful flight home after a long business trip. But as the other passengers boarded, I couldn't help but notice an old man who seemed to be eyeing me as he made his way down the aisle. I tried to ignore him and focus on my book, but as luck would have it, he was seated next to me. I put on my headphones, hoping to signal that I wasn't interested in conversation, but he tapped me on the shoulder and asked if I could turn them down so he could talk to me. Feeling annoyed but trying to be polite, I obliged. The old man introduced himself as Steve and began to tell me stories about his life, his family, and his travels. At first, I found his stories mildly interesting, but as the flight dragged on, they became more and more unsettling. He told me about a time when he had visited a foreign country and gotten lost in the back alleys, narrowly avoiding being mugged by a gang of locals. He told me about a former colleague of his who had died under mysterious circumstances, and how he had always suspected foul play but could never prove it. As Steve talked, I started to feel uneasy. There was something about his stories that seemed off, like he was trying to get a reaction out of me. And then, he started to ask me personal questions, like where I lived, what I did for a living, and whether I had a family. I tried to deflect his questions, but he was persistent. He leaned in close to me, invading my personal space, and asked if I was married. When I told him I wasn't, he gave me a lecherous grin and said, "Well, you're a beautiful young woman. I'm sure you won't have any trouble finding a man." I felt my skin crawl as I realized what was happening. This old man was hitting on me, and he wouldn't take no for an answer. I tried to make excuses, saying that I needed to get some work done, but he kept talking, his voice getting louder and more insistent. I looked around, hoping to catch the eye of a flight attendant, but they were nowhere to be seen. I was trapped, alone with this creepy old man, and I didn't know what to do. Then, as if on cue, the plane hit a patch of turbulence, and Steve's drink spilled all over me. He laughed, saying it was just an accident, but I knew better. This was his way of getting even closer to me, of making me feel even more uncomfortable. I had had enough. I stood up, gathered my things, and told him I needed to use the restroom. As I walked down the aisle, I could feel his eyes on me, like he was still trying to get inside my head. When I returned to my seat, I pretended to be asleep, hoping that he would get the message and leave me alone. I closed my eyes and fell asleep. I woke up with a start as I felt a cold, bony hand on my thigh. I looked over and saw Steve's face, his eyes gleaming with a twisted sense of satisfaction. I recoiled in horror and tried to push him away, but he was stronger than I thought. He started to run his hand up my leg, inching closer and closer to my private area. "Stop it!" I shouted, trying to attract the attention of the other passengers. But no one seemed to notice what was happening, or if they did, they didn't care. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as Steve's hand crept closer and closer. I was trapped, powerless, and alone. And then, as if by some miracle, the seatbelt sign pinged on, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing that we were about to experience some turbulence. Steve's hand jerked away from me as he grabbed onto his armrest for support. I took my chance and quickly unbuckled my seatbelt, standing up and rushing to the nearest flight attendant. I told her what had happened, and she immediately called the captain, who radioed ahead to the airport authorities. As soon as the plane landed, Steve was escorted off by security, and I was taken to a private room to give a statement. It turned out that he had a long history of predatory behavior towards young women, and I wasn't the first victim he had targeted on a flight. I left the airport feeling shaken and violated, but also relieved that Steve had been caught and would hopefully never harm anyone again. It was a scary and traumatizing experience, one that I would never forget, but I was also proud of myself for standing up for myself and speaking out.